what are some of the things that Jason Kenney can do as a premier to get Alberta's oil and gas sector back on its feet like Donald Trump is doing? I can think of a few. Some of these are inspired by what Trump is doing in the States and other U.S. lawmakers. Some are frankly inspired by what the anti-oil extremists, including those in Trudeau's staff, have done to us. Here's a short list. I'm sure I'll come up with more, and I'll do a supplementary video, but here are 6 ideas. First, set up an oil and gas infrastructure police force in Alberta. If I was Jason Kenney, the incoming premier, I don't think you can trust Trudeau's RCMP. I'm sorry, I wish you could, and I hate to say anything critical of the Mounties, but on anything that's even vaguely political, the RCMP can't be counted on. You might remember when Trudeau's former energy minister, Jim Carr, briefly mentioned that maybe violent anti-pipeline protesters could potentially face, say, the Canadian military. Trudeau frog-marched him out there the next day to make a groveling apology. Same thing in the Trans Mountain riots, outright riots on Burnaby Mountain a few years back. Why did police just stand by and let it all happen? And by the way, that was under Harper's watch. So step 1 is a provincial police squad, or a detail or a force, tasked just with protecting oil and gas and other industrial infrastructure from sabotage. So real police, probably recruited from existing police forces, including the RCMP, who would have jurisdiction in this one file, like a vice squad or another specialty squad. It would be the infrastructure police. They wouldn't be political police. It would be the opposite, actually. They would be told to uphold the law, unlike Trudeau's RCMP or police run by leftists like Calgary and Edmonton's mayors. Second idea, actually use existing laws. So this provincial infrastructure police could lay charges of mischief and vandalism and trespass wherever appropriate. I have personally been to probably half a dozen anti-oil protests where left-wing extremists break and enter onto oil and gas companies' property, sometimes even putting lives at risk by tampering with high-pressure pipeline equipment. 99% of the time, oil and gas companies are too politically timid to sue the protesters. Maybe they think they'll be embarrassed in the court of public opinion for suing Greenpeace. I think it would be the opposite. Canadians would cheer someone standing up to these foreign-funded, job-killing bullies for once. But the thing is, police don't actually need a company's permission to charge someone with a crime for breaking into an oil and gas facility. And Jason Kenney's Attorney General should have a mandate letter to instruct him to prosecute every single anti-oil crime on site. Zero tolerance. And his infrastructure police should lay the charges. Third, pressure companies to stand up for themselves too. As I just said, police don't need permission of a pipeline company or an oil sands company to file charges, to lay charges against a criminal. But if a company doesn't cooperate, it makes it difficult for police. Jason Kenney, as Premier and his Attorney General and his Energy Minister, should use their moral pressure on oil companies to get them to stand up for themselves and their workers and the province by demanding that these companies sue Greenpeace protesters in civil court. I've seen it done only once in Canada. Syncrude, I don't know if you know this, Syncrude actually sued Greenpeace for one of their stunts. I bet you didn't know that. Which proves my point. Companies who do stand up for themselves in the court of law by suing environmental criminals, they probably don't have to worry because Greenpeace didn't want to publicize the suit because it's so embarrassing to them. It shows they're criminals. It shows how foreigners organized the whole thing from far away. It's not that an oil company would make money from a lawsuit, but it would cost the anti-oil sands extremists a lot of money to defend it, and it would tie them up in court. But most importantly, as you can see here, look at this. This is a Greenpeace legal document in the Syncrude lawsuit. They have to disclose all of their unethical dealings, all of their memos, all of their emails, who paid whom, who was pulling the strings. All those records are being disgorged into the public eye. So you can't force an oil company to have self-respect and sue. I get it. But I think Jason Kenney and his cabinet could say to oil companies, don't you dare come lobbying us in the provincial government for things. Don't you dare come to meet us with demands for this or requests for that if you won't even help yourself. If you're not willing to sue oil and gas Anti-oil and gas criminals don't even bother me. I think that they would go along with that moral leadership. Fourth, I think there is something Kenney can do too, related to the above. It's never been done before in Canada, and this is what I mean by copying best practices from the United States. The Dakota Access Pipeline, they sued Greenpeace. They argued that Greenpeace broke an organized crime law. Let me read this headline. You can see it. Dakota Access Pipeline owner sues Greenpeace, arguing it broke organized crime law. Do you remember the huge illegal protest? Trespass, violence, mischief, vandalism. Look, it was huge in numbers, very well organized. It happened under Obama. They were trying to stop this pipeline called the Dakota Access Pipeline. Look at that. Trump got it built pretty much immediately after he was elected. But the pipeline company sued the protesters under the U.S. RICO statute. If you heard of RICO statute, it's really an anti-mafia law. It's an organized crime law. It stands for Racketeer Influenced Corrupt Organizations. In the end, that lawsuit was unsuccessful for reasons specific to that case. But let me read to you our Canadian version of the RICO statute. It's section 467.1 of our criminal code. The following definitions apply in this act. Criminal organization means a group, however organized, that A, is composed of 3 or more persons in or outside Canada, and B, has as one of its main purposes or main activities the facilitation or commission of one or more serious offenses that, if committed, would likely result in the direct or indirect receipt of a material benefit, including a financial benefit, by the group or any of the persons who constitute the group. Yeah, that's Greenpeace. 3 or more people in or outside Canada committing crimes as part of a business model. They fundraise off those crimes. That's in our criminal code. If the Hells Angels were to do what Greenpeace did, we'd prosecute them. Kenney should do that. My 5th suggestion for the incoming Premier of Alberta is related. It's another U.S. best practices example. I mentioned this the other day on the show when it was introduced in the South Dakota Senate. It's a law against riot boosting. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's such a short bill. Let me just read to you the guts of it. In addition to any other liability or criminal penalty under law, a person is liable for riot boosting, jointly and severally with any other person, to the state or a political subdivision in an action for damages if the person, 1, participates in any riot and directs, advises, encourages, or solicits any other person participating in the riot to acts of force or violence. 2, does not personally participate in any riot, but directs, advises, encourages, or solicits other persons participating in the riot to acts of force or violence. Or 3, upon the direction, advice, encouragement, or solicitation of any other person, uses force or violence, or makes any threat to use force or violence, if accompanied by immediate power of execution, by 3 or more persons acting together and without authority of law. This is way better than the RICO statute because it goes further. It goes to the masterminds who are pulling the strings, people goading them on. It doesn't even require them to have some sort of benefit or profit from it. The law continues. It also lets private citizens or companies sue. You don't have to wait for government prosecutors. And it has huge civil penalties. You get your damages back triple, I think. Alberta should bring in a riot boosting law. So should Saskatchewan, by the way. Tell you one thing, Greenpeace, they're such money grubbers, they would stay far away. They would hate a law that makes them pay triple damages, don't you think? Here's a 6th suggestion for the incoming Premier of Alberta, and it's something I've worked on a little bit when I set up a non-profit called ethicaloil.org back in the day. I called it the Compliance Project. Basically, every single one of those anti-oil extremist groups on the left is regulated by some regulator. The Canada Revenue Agency, if it's a charity like the crooked David Suzuki Foundation, maybe an elections commissioner if it runs as a third-party campaign group, the lobbying commissioner if you're like Gerald Butts and you were a lobbyist. I see all sorts of quack doctors out there giving their junk science medical opinions about global warming these days, playing off the fact that they're a doctor but serving up BS. Maybe there's a complaint to the College of Physicians and Surgeons in the most extreme cases. My point is, the left and their environmental NGOs harass oil and gas and pipeline companies full time, make them comply with every dot every I and cross every T. And government agencies like the National Energy Board and the Alberta Energy Regulator and even the courts are only too happy to let them do it. Well, as long as those laws are on the books, fight fire with fire. Go after the environmental NGOs the same way they go after the pipeline companies. Hold them to compliance. So there you have it. A half dozen practical suggestions for the new Premier of Alberta. Some of them can be done immediately, prosecuting all crimes by Greenpeace, including RICO-style crimes. Those laws are on the books right now. Filing complaints with regulatory agencies against scofflaw environmental groups who are cheating our tax system. That can be done right away. Some can be done within a few months, like bringing in laws against riot boosting or setting up a special oil and gas infrastructure police force the same way there's a vice squad or a white-collar crime squad. Some will happen gradually over time, like encouraging oil and gas companies to start acting like proud corporate citizens instead of being self-loathing and submissive. That's a cultural change that'll take years. Frankly, on that point, if I were Jason Kenney or his energy minister, I would simply refuse to meet with any oil company whose senior executives have shilled for the carbon tax or a cap on oil sands production. Those are a fifth column. Don't even meet with them. I would positively punish the cowards in this photo, the Quislings, the 4 oil CEOs who sold out the entire industry in the entire province by supporting Rachel Notley's carbon tax in return for massive subsidies to their own companies. They'll take that shame with them to their grave. No need to bully them, but just no need to legitimize them either. If an oil CEO truly cares more about pleasing Justin Trudeau and the CBC and saying they support a carbon tax, that's fine, that's all right, free country, but they should be frozen out of Jason Kenney's offices. So those are my top 6 suggestions. I have a few more that I'm still working on in my mind. None of them are silver bullets here. But together, I think they'll slowly turn things around. And maybe one day, we'll be able to join the oil and gas boom that Texas has too. That's an excerpt from the Ezra Levant show. Every day, I do a video monologue, and then I interview an interesting guest, and then I end by reading my hate mail. But you've got to subscribe to it, which you can do at therebel.media/shows.